November 24th, 1971, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, air traffic controllers receive an alarming message from a passenger jet flying from Portland to Seattle. One of the passengers claims he has a bomb in his briefcase. If his demands are not met, he will blow up the plane. A few hours later, somewhere above a dense forest in the middle of a thunderstorm, an unknown man lowers the rear stairway of a Boeing 727, puts on a parachute, straps a bag full of cash to his body, and steps into the darkness. No one ever sees him again. Who was this man? Did he survive the jump? And how did he disappear despite one of the largest FBI operations in American history? The day before Thanksgiving, at Portland International Airport in Oregon, a middle-aged man walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He identified himself as DanCooper. There was nothing unusual about his appearance. He appeared to be around 40 years old, about 6 feet tall, wore a black overcoat over a business suit, dark sunglasses, and carried a small briefcase. Inside the briefcase was a bomb. Cooper calmly boarded the Boeing 727, took a seat near the back of the cabin, ordered a bourbon, lit a cigarette, and appeared so relaxed that no one around him paid any attention. Once the plane reached altitude, he took out a small note and handed it to one of the flight attendants. She didn't even bother reading it. Passengers occasionally slipped flight attendants' notes in an attempt to flirt with them, so she casually put it into her pocket and continued working. Then the man leaned toward her and quietly said she'd better read the note after all because there was a bomb in his briefcase. She sat down beside him and read the message. Then she asked him to open the briefcase. Inside were several cylindrical objects connected by wires to some kind of device. It is still unknown whether it was a real bomb or an expertly made fake. But at that moment, no one doubted it was real. He then instructed the flight attendant to relay his demands to the pilots. Once the plane landed in Seattle, he wanted $200,000 in cash, all in $20 bills, 4 working parachutes, and the aircraft fully refueled. In today's money, that's about $1.5 million. While air traffic controllers coordinated with the police and the FBI, a surprising calm remained on board. Cooper ordered another bourbon, asked for a glass of water, paid in cash, and even left the flight attendant a generous tip. Meanwhile, a massive operation was already underway in Seattle. The FBI decided to comply with the hijackers' demands. The money was hastily collected from several nearby banks. Agents managed to record only some of the serial numbers on the bills. There simply wasn't enough time to document them all. By then, the aircraft had already spent nearly 2 hours circling Seattle, even though the flight between Portland and Seattle normally took only about 30 minutes. Throughout that time, Cooper communicated with the pilots only through the flight attendants. During those conversations, one of them noticed something unusual. According to her, Cooper seemed remarkably familiar with the area. He accurately identified nearby towns and even mentioned the locations of military bases. Despite that, he unexpectedly rejected the military parachutes. Instead, he insisted on ordinary civilian parachutes. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., the plane landed in Seattle. After landing, Cooper ordered all the cabin lights to be turned off. He knew that by now snipers had almost certainly surrounded the airport, and in the darkness they wouldn't be able to see what was happening inside the aircraft. Once the money and the parachutes were delivered, Cooper kept his end of the bargain. He released every passenger along with 2 of the flight attendants. The only people left on board were the captain, the first officer, the flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant, who was about to spend the next several hours beside him. At this point, the FBI had almost no idea what the hijacker intended to do next. Cooper ordered the crew to take off again and head for Mexico. When the pilots explained that the plane didn't have enough fuel for a flight that long, he changed the plan and instructed them to fly toward Nevada, where they would make another fuel stop. But by then, the authorities were ready. military aircraft took off to secretly follow the airliner, while armed tactical teams waited at the expected refueling stop. At around 7:40 p.m., the plane took off once again. A few minutes after departure, Cooper ordered the entire crew to remain inside the cockpit and not come out under any circumstances. Just before the cockpit door closed, the flight attendant noticed him carefully inspecting the parachutes and tying something around his waist. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. Not long afterward, the pilots noticed something unusual on their instruments. Cabin pressure began to drop, followed by a warning light indicating that the Boeing 727's rear stairway had been deployed. About 15 minutes later, the aircraft flew into a powerful thunderstorm. Outside the windows, there was almost complete darkness, heavy rain, violent winds, and near-zero visibility. Then the pilots felt a sudden jolt. The tail of the aircraft lurched sharply upward so that the crew had to stabilize the plane. At exactly 8:13 p.m., somewhere above a dark forest in the middle of a thunderstorm, carrying a bag filled with cash, DanCooper stepped into the night. 2 hours later, the aircraft landed safely in Reno. The moment the doors opened, FBI agents rushed inside. But Cooper was gone. The only things left behind were 2 unused parachutes, a black clip-on tie, and 8 cigarette butts lying near the seat where the hijacker had been sitting. For years, those items seemed like almost useless pieces of evidence. But in the 2010s, specialists re-examined the tie. They discovered microscopic particles of titanium, cerium, and strontium sulfide on its surface, materials that were extremely uncommon in everyday life during the early 1970s. It raised the possibility that Cooper had worked as an engineer. What's more, some of those materials were reportedly used during the development of the supersonic passenger jet, the Boeing 2707. Investigators hoped DNA analysis would reveal even more. However, all 8 cigarette butts that could have contained the hijacker's genetic material had mysteriously disappeared from the case files. No one knows when they went missing or who was responsible. While experts analyzed the evidence, the search operation was only beginning. The military aircraft following the hijacked Boeing lost track of it in the darkness and poor visibility. Investigators believe Cooper parachuted somewhere near the Lewis River. Hundreds of FBI agents, police officers, and volunteers searched the area for weeks. Several unidentified human remains were even discovered. None of them belonged to DanCooper. Meanwhile, the story spread rapidly across the country. 3 weeks after the hijacking, the Los Angeles Times received a letter from someone claiming to be DanCooper. The author wrote that he had never been a professional criminal, felt no sense of romance about what he had done, and had no intention of ever doing anything like it again. But investigators were never able to determine whether the letter had actually been written by the real Cooper. Later, several more letters arrived, each written by different people, and none of them helped the investigation. As time passed, investigators began asking a different question. Did Cooper survive the jump at all? Of the 4 parachutes provided, Cooper took only 2. It was later discovered that one was an old training parachute, while the other was nothing more than a dummy reserve parachute that police had mistakenly grabbed in the rush. Then, 9 years later, in 1980, an 8-year-old boy was on holiday with his parents on the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver. While playing in the sand, he accidentally uncovered 3 badly deteriorated bundles of cash. When experts examined the money, they found that the serial numbers matched the ones the FBI had recorded before handing over the ransom. 2 of the bundles were completely intact and each contained 100 bills. The 3rd bundle was missing exactly 10 bills. Yet despite decades of investigation, hundreds of suspects, and thousands of hours of FBI work, the true identity of DanCooper has never been established. So what really happened that night? We'll most likely never know.